And recording is started. That's a good sign. Well, good morning or afternoon or evening, everybody, depending upon where you are. You get to see Brent Ozar picture right now, but I am Mark Caldwell, hosting today. But I don't have the all the fancy video gear that Brent does, so I'm just going to talk for a minute here. Welcome to the Professional Development Virtual Chapter, and we're happy to have Brent Ozar presenting on his consulting lines for DBAs. And as soon as I can figure out how to make my slide switch.
You can click on the next slide and it should.
There we go. Okay. So sound, obviously you should be hearing us now. Sound should be coming through your computer. If it's not, it's not our fault. If you have questions during the session, go ahead and use the Q&A menu to post questions, and Brent will be fielding those. I don't know, Brent, are you going to take questions as we go, or wait till the end?
Oh, yeah. If you have questions, feel free to fire away. And the drawback of live meeting is that you can only ask one question at a time. So if you want to ask multiples, you have to delete your old question and ask the new one.
Okay. And this is being recorded for later viewing, and keep an eye on the Twitter hashtag #ProfDev, or our website for recording details will be available, should be available within 24 hours of the presentation. Come on.
Try to click.
My notes. There we go.
I'll advance it for you.
Okay. So I think everybody here is probably already familiar with PASS, Professional Association for SQL Server. Membership is free. Fantastic contacts and training are priceless. Take advantage of what's out there. Some of the different training options are available. You can get all the details at the website sqlpass.org. There's a 24 hours of PASS, which is online presentations like this, 24 of these, or I think the last time it was done in March, there were 28, actually, a few bonus sessions. It was last done in March. Videos of those are online and available. And then keep your eye on the SQL Pass website for the next round. We've done 3 of these, as I recall.
I think you're right.
And they've all been awesome training. There's SQL Saturday, which are local events in local areas throughout the year. Those are free. Take advantage. Free is a good price. There's the SQL Rally. Just wrapped up the one in Orlando a few weeks ago, and I noticed that there's already another one scheduled for Stockholm, Sweden in November. So if you're one of our European folks, go ahead and take advantage of, or if you just want to fly over there, take advantage of that training. It's fantastic. It's kind of a midpoint training between SQL Saturday, which is a 1-day free session. SQL Rally is a couple of days, and then the big one, the North American Summit, which is 3 primary days plus a couple days of pre-cons, and that's going to be this year again in Seattle, October 12th to 14th. So take advantage of all the training that's available. Okay, so one more slide, I believe.
Okay, yep, there we go.
There we go. All right, and here's the main man, Brent Ozar, founder of Brent Ozar PLF. Your technology pain relief experts. At least that's what it says on his website. Brent has a lot of experience as a DBA, a SAN administrator, virtualization, and he does a lot of training. So Brent brings a wide spectrum of background and information and skills, and applies it all here. So let's take advantage of Brent's brain. He's also the co-founder of SQL Cruise, which if you were on earlier, you heard him talking a little bit about that. The next one actually is coming up here in a few days. They're going to Alaska. So awesome, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the next series that they put out there are. And of course, Brent's been a speaker at the PASS Summit and SQL Saturdays, and you can get more information on his website and blog at brentozar.com. And I'll turn it over to you, Brent. Thank you for coming.
Cool, thanks, Mark. I'll go ahead and switch over to my slide deck now. So today what we're going to talk about is consulting lines for database administrators, and I'm not going to talk about how PowerPoint keeps line breaking my slides in all the wrong spots. Absolutely kills me. I'm anal retentive about the way my slides look, and it's not looking right. So a little bit about me first. As Mark said, I'm a co-founder of Brent Ozar PLF, along with Jeremiah Peshka, Kendra Little, and Tim Ford that you see pictured there. Getting ready to go on SQL Cruise. I'm an MVP, Microsoft Certified Master of SQL Server, co-authored the book Professional SQL Server 2008 Internals and Troubleshooting, and I do database administration for Stack Overflow, the biggest Q&A site on the web. But I didn't start out this way. Way back in time, and of course this where I'm going to be cursing the fonts on this the whole way through, this is a picture of me several years back when I was working in Dallas as a project lead and team manager for a software company. It was a little bitty software company. We had about 8 or 9 developers underneath me, and I got in there because I really like doing things like spouting off lines that consultants like to use. Most of my time was spent either doing programming, and I use the word programming really loosely because VBScript ASP is not really programming, it's scripting is what it really is, because I'm not that good of a programmer. I spent time managing my staff and just trying to learn technology fast enough to solve my problems. Now, we had a SQL Server backend. I'd been using a SQL Server for about, 5-6 years at that point. But a big problem came up, and we were trying to do transaction log backups every 5 minutes, and our transaction log backups took longer and longer each time, so they would take longer than 5 minutes. We couldn't get our transaction log backups to finish fast enough. And I was in over my head. I just was not a SQL Server expert at that time. I was really just learning technology as fast as I could, but it still wasn't fast enough to solve my problems. And you can tell a little bit about this by looking at the books on my bookshelf. Now, this is a bad photo, but I'm going to zoom in here a little, and you're going to be able to pick out some book titles. I also rotated it so that you can see these easier. On the left-hand side, going down from the top, I've got a couple of books on UML, a markup language that's supposed to let you design databases and applications through pretty Visio charts and communicate those quickly to your staff. And it was supposed to be the next big thing, and I was working with it, trying to make better software with it, so I was trying to learn that. And if we go down below, I had measuring for success, or measuring your process, measuring software processes, constructing superior software, developing user interfaces, because I wanted to make my stuff look gorgeous. And then over on the other side, I was actually going to the dark side there. I was going Java for the web with servlets, JSP, and EJB. Because at that time, I was trying to decide whether or not I was going to go into Java or .NET, because I knew VBScript just frankly wasn't going to last a whole lot longer. So clearly, I didn't even have a SQL Server book on this side of my bookshelf. In my credit, I did have some on the other side, but none of them were good stuff. I really didn't know what I was doing to find out why I couldn't do transaction log backups fast enough. So what did I do? I brought in an expert. I brought in, you know what the definition of an expert is? It's a guy from out of town carrying a briefcase. And that's exactly what I did. We brought in this fancy pants consultant, and actually a team of consultants, and we're talking through our problems with them, and they take one look at our SQL Server, and the first words out of their mouth were, this can't be right. You can't be doing this many transactions per second. We've never seen a system generate that many transactions per second before. Now, I'll be the first guy to tell you, we were not rocket scientists. It wasn't that our systems were so good. It was just that this consultant was so bad. They really didn't know what they were doing. They were literally guys with a briefcase from out of town. Alan White, SQL Runner on Twitter, points out in the Q&A that a consultant is a guy who uses your watch to tell you what time it is. And you'll notice I don't wear a watch. If anyone would like to know what time it is, just let me know and I can ask Alan. So I was so frustrated immediately. I'm like, what on earth is going on here? But the consultant, to his credit, immediately turned around and asked a question that I will remember for a very long time. He asked, would you like it to be 10% faster, 100% faster, or 1,000% faster? What he was really asking was, hey, I've never seen a system this big, but how big are you trying to go? Do you want to make it just barely fast enough so that you can get your transaction log backups done and squeak in the nick of time, like they take 4 minutes and 30 seconds to run instead of 5 minutes and 30 seconds to run every 5 minutes? Or do you want to make a really big difference? Do you want to make them run in, say, 3 minutes or 2.5 minutes? Or do you want to make them run insanely fast, like a matter of seconds? And by asking that, he really kind of forced me and my manager and the guys on my team to say, wait a minute here, we're really kind of asking this guy to do something huge. Now, if he's never seen a system with this many transaction logs per second, maybe we have a big problem. Maybe we either need to get in, and he even was the first guy to say, I'm not the right guy if you want to get it to be 100% faster, 1,000% faster. I can work really hard, tune a lot of knobs, and get it to be 10% faster. But if you want it to be twice as fast, or 10 times as fast, or 11 times as fast, what you're going to have to do is call in either a much bigger consultant or buy software or hardware in order to solve this problem. Now, there's times in our lives as database administrators where just the right index or just the right tweak to our database schema can make an unbelievable performance difference. I love times like that, but the reality is that's low-hanging fruit. And usually by the time they call in a consultant, all the low-hanging fruit is gone. So as a database administrator, when I was working with my end users, my report writers, my developers who wanted to run their queries, one of the first things I would do when they would say, I've got a slow query is, I'd say, okay, how much faster do you want it to run? Because that determines how much time I'm going to put into it. It's so awful when someone brings you a query and you say, okay, I'm going to go work on this and make it faster. And right now it takes a minute. And you work so hard to get it down to 10 seconds. And then you keep working hard to get it to run under 5 seconds. And then you keep working thinking, it's so close, I could get it to run under a second if I get this thing just right. And you bring it back to the guy and you go, well, I've got it to 7 seconds. It took me 2 days to get there. But he's like, wow, that's amazing. All I wanted to do was avoid the 30-second timeouts that I've been getting. You've got to set yourself that finish line. And you also have to set up a contract between yourself and the user. And I'm not talking about anything when you're in writing, just an implicit contract that, hey, however much faster you want it to go, also influences how much work it's going to take for me and how much software or hardware we're going to have to ask our boss for. And by asking this question, we force the person on the other end to say, if I want him to make it twice as fast, that might be a lot of work. Maybe I could live with it just the way it is. Or, if they want it 1,000% faster, if it's currently taking 15 minutes and they want it to immediately refresh as soon as they click OK, all of a sudden they're going to start thinking, man, that's a huge difference, and maybe he's not going to be able to do that easily, or maybe I should give him a week in order to pull that off. That's what this line does, and I've got links to, at the end of this where I'm going to talk through all of these different consulting lines that I've used, and more details on my blog where you can go through and see examples of where I've used these in real life. Now, sometimes the business is going to come to you and say, yes, we do want it to be 1,000% faster. We want it to be insanely quick. Right now, we're only having 1 or 2 users per 5 minutes run this query, but we're getting ready to roll it out to our entire company. We're going to have thousands of salespeople access this, in which case you're going to have to buckle down and do some serious work. So in one of those situations, I was at another company this time. The company decided we've got to make this data warehouse of ours, go a whole lot faster. Right now we've got 10 users, but we want to have 200 users rolling through this, and we want the reports to be significantly faster. So they put together a dream team, they called it, of everybody at the client, plus some people at Microsoft as well. Put together the best and brightest minds of the people out of the entire company, and then they asked me to go along in order to hold everybody's suitcases. So we were based out of Miami, and we all piled into airplanes and flew all the way out to Chicago, actually. Funny coincidence that I'm here today. And blocked out our calendars for a week, took backups of our whole data warehouse, brought those along with us too. If you've ever tried to back up a multi-terabyte data warehouse and restore it on other hardware for testing, you'll know that there's a lot of work that happens with that. Plus, you have to airlift all your applications. We had to airlift a copy of and I say airlift, meaning back up and restore copies of our reporting servers, our application servers, our nightly processing servers, so that we can reproduce all of this stuff in Microsoft's lab with their help. Microsoft maintains these things called technology centers, Microsoft Technology Center and MTC. They've got several of them around the U.S. and around the world where they have data centers full of beautiful brand new hardware for you to use from their partners like Dell, EMC, HP, NetApp, all these guys. Now, the hardware vendors give Microsoft access to all this hardware, and then Microsoft lets you bring in your stuff, your databases, your applications, so that they can help you see how to make it run faster. Because sometimes the answer is hardware, and sometimes it's software, and sometimes it's both. And you want to find out by doing a whole bunch of load testing very quickly in one dedicated environment. Man, it's a real pain in the rear to get all these different hardware vendors to bring you in demo hardware. But they can just all drop it in Microsoft and leave it there. So the really cool part is that, I thought I saw a question come in there. The really cool part, at least for me as a database administrator, because remember again, I was just a lowly DBA at this time. Not lowly, I mean, I felt lowly. I felt lowly because people kept saying, no, we can't add indexes. You have to, I'm like, come on, man. So that was what a Microsoft Technology Center was. And unfortunately, it's not perfect because just like in your world, hardware breaks. So we got 2-3 days into this engagement that was a week long. And we kept running into problems with the SQL server that we were trying to use. And the Microsoft sysadmin who was there brought us some bad news. He said, well, we had this brand new server from this one particular server vendor, loaded with 0.5 terabyte of memory, all brand new memory chips, but at least one of them is wrong. One of them is broken because we would keep having SQL Server do dumps even when we were just executing simple queries. We finally tracked it down to something was wrong in the memory subsystem, but in order for us to fix it, the hardware vendor was going to FedEx in all new memory. Now, if you'll notice down there on the screen, this is an actual picture I took when I was getting frustrated over at the MTC. The sysadmins had ripped open the server. They got a bunch of spare memory packets that they'd gotten from all kinds of different other servers, and they were trying to replace one by one and do a process of elimination. But in order to do that, they had to boot up the server with just 2 sticks of RAM in it, wait a while in order to do memory testing, and then back out. What a pain in the rear. It took hours in order to do that. So instead of waiting and waiting, trying to find out, and even then they might not know if it was the right answer, they said, well, we're just going to have the vendor FedEx us in a whole new set of memory so that when you come in by 10 a.m. in the morning, we're going to have all the memory in, we'll put it all in immediately and start going. Now, I had to ask a question because at this point, we were wrapping up tens of thousands of dollars per day in this. I had to ask, what happens if that doesn't work? This is the same vendor who sent us all new memory to begin with. What happens if they send us all new memory and we've got another bad ship? Because at the time, this was a brand new server, brand new line of RAM that was extremely fast relative to everything else that was out there. If one is broken, why wouldn't another one in the next round be broken? And how are we going to go about fixing that? Now, people get really frustrated when I ask questions like that, but the reality is that whenever we're sitting around idle, this is what we're doing. This is Carlos and I, a buddy of mine from that company. We literally had nothing to do while we waited for the load test to run, so we went out and sampled some of Chicago's best restaurants. I got lots of pictures. I'm only showing you one, but I've got like 24 of when the whole team went out to all these, all P.F. Chang, Portillo's, deep dish pizza, you name it. We were out, we had nothing better to do. We were all just waiting to find out what we were going to be able to do. That is a bad plan. Ideally, anytime I have to wait for something to work, I want to first start working on plan B. I want to start sketching out whatever it is that I'm going to do if the main plan doesn't work. So for example, I had a client here in town where their data warehouse went bad. Ended up having to restore the entire 13 terabyte data warehouse from scratch. But while that was happening, because restoring a 13 terabyte data warehouse takes a long time, we started asking ourselves, and I immediately started laying out, I said, do you have anything to write with? Because I want to start sketching out all of our other plans. And the manager over there said, yeah, absolutely, got a pile of drink coasters here. Here, let me give you a few. So he slides these out, and on one of the drink coasters it said Virgin across the top. And that's an awfully odd thing to write your disaster recovery plans on. But I had to start writing out and say, okay, this is one of our plans. We're going to attach the W drive to an HP server. If it fails, this is what we're going to do. If it works, this is what we're going to do. I'm assigning Noah to this because Noah's the guy who will be able to work through this recovery plan. Now, there's one task. I'm giving that off to Noah, and he goes and runs. Now I'm going to take another coaster, and I'm going to build another plan. And we're going to go through and sketch out all these plan B, C, D, because ideally, I want to have parallel recovery tracks. I want to have as many people working on a fix to the solution as possible. In the example of a 13 terabyte data warehouse, one of the solutions we had was we had a machine lying around with a fairly large amount of local SATA drives in it. Now, SATA drives aren't the best thing to run a data warehouse on, but when I'm desperate, I might be willing to do that. So I'd ask the client, hey, would you be okay if running on SATA for, say, a week while we go and resuscitate the real server? You would be, in order to, the guy says, yes, of course, I'd love to just have anything that we could query right now. Said, okay, here's another employee. You go take that server over there and start restoring the backup over on that as well. Now, at least it's going to still take whatever time it takes, but then we've got yet another choice 8 hours or 12 hours from now, that if everything else has gone to hell in a handbasket, I still have this other box that's perfectly workable, and then it gives me yet another, arrow in my arsenal there. So what else do I want to tell you about that? The key objectives are to have everyone working, and that when things are down, when you're trying to make all these crazy decisions and the server's on fire, smoke's pouring out of the data center, very often, this is when we make our biggest mistakes, when we go through and start shooting from the hip and we're doing things that we're not necessarily comfortable with. So often, someone will tell me, hey, just trust me, try this one thing, make the service account a domain administrator. Just trust me, I know it's going to work. I'm not really comfortable with that. Hey, just even though it's a clustered instance, just go ahead and directly attach the drives to the one server, or it was attached to Windows 2008 before and it's dynamic disks, but you can attach them to 2003 as basic disks. It'll be fine. Trust me, I've done it a million times. So I get really nervous. Whether I'm a consultant or whether I'm an employee, I want to know that I have some kind of insurance. I want to know that if I go and touch somebody's servers and I break something, that if I do something, I really believe in it. When the chips are down, I am only going to do things that I've done before and that I know will work. If I haven't done something before, or I have a suspicion that it's not going to work, I'm not going to go try to learn how to do that on a broken system, because you're already dealing with all kinds of dangerous stuff there. Now, at the same time, I don't want to just cover my rear. I don't want to just say, I'm not having anything to do with that, man. That's your problem. So I have a consulting line for that. But the delivery for this is so key. You can't just say it as a jerk. You can't just say, hey, I tell you what, why don't you drive, man? Here you go. And by driving, I mean stepping out of the chair and letting someone else sit at the keyboard and do the thing you're not comfortable with. You can come off like a jerk by delivering this line. The bad episodes of this or bad occurrences of this line are things like put up or shut up. Hey, buddy, why don't you put up or shut up? You show me how it's done. Or another way to say it is, hey, I'm from Missouri. I'm from the show me state. You're going to have to show me. When you say things like that, your fellow users, your fellow DBAs, your fellow consultants, your clients, whatever, are going to get angry and pissed off at you and think that you're trying to just play the blame game. The key is that you really do want to learn. Sometimes the other person does know what they're talking about, especially when you get into a consulting environment where I have to work with complete strangers, and I don't have the time to say, can I see your resume? Can I check your qualifications? Sometimes they really do know what they're talking about, and you can gauge it by the respect that they get from other people in the room. You as a database administrator, you're faced with a slightly different challenge. Your sysadmins, your SAN admins, your virtualization sysadmins, your developers will tell you to cram things through SQL Server that shouldn't fit. Tim Ford has a fantastic line for this. He says, quit trying to put your square peg in my round hole. So that's not really the right thing to do, and you don't want to sit there getting a square peg jammed in your round hole. So you want to deliver this same line. You want to say, well, I'm not really comfortable doing that because I don't think I know how to do that quite well. Would you mind driving? And for you, this has a slightly different effect. This immediately sets up that contract with everybody in the room saying, if you know what you're doing, I trust you, go ahead, you take care of it. Sometimes people will just chicken out, that they don't know what they're doing. They'll go, well, I was really just reading a magazine article about it, or I read it on this blog by somebody who's an MVP, so they must know what they're talking about. Maybe they misread it, maybe they didn't understand, but maybe they really do know what they're talking about, and you have to let them give it a try. This is a picture, I tell you what, see, every one of these lines I've learned from a really hard, ugly, nasty mistake. So this is a picture of my cubicle from, this is around about 2008, 2009, I believe. That is not me sitting in that cube. I have not joined the hair club for men, although I do have that same hunchback over posture all the time. This one is from an episode where I went through a SAN upgrade. SAN upgrades are notoriously nasty. You have to flash a whole bunch of firmware in exactly the right order. You have to flash the controller heads. You have to flash the drives. You have to flash the switches. You have to flash your host bus adapters in the servers. You have to make sure that your multipathing driver software is correct, that your SAN monitoring software is correct. All of these have intricate version dependencies, and they must be done in exactly the right order. When they fail, you lose, as in you lose the SAN, you lose all of the data on it. All of these have also tricky version dependencies that you have to upgrade them in the right order, even from version to version. Some of them will tell you you can go from 1.1 to 1.2 online, but you can't go from 1.1 to 1.3. You have to go 1.1, then flash it to 1.2, then flash it to 1.3. You can't skip any versions. Oh, it's a nasty pain in the rear. So we had a SAN firmware upgrade that we had to do on our production SAN. And my best friend and I, who sat in the cubicle right next to me, we built this long, elaborate plan of everything that we needed to do with orders and version numbers. We sent it to the vendor. We got them to sign off on it, saying, yes, this is correct. That's the way that you should do it. They tweaked a few things about our plan. Okay, no problem. We go in there at Saturday night at 10 p.m. with this big, long, list of check, check, check. We go through and do it all. And pretty soon the thing goes to hell in a handbasket, and we have a non-working SAN. Well, at that point, the blame is on me, and I'm a big boy. I'll take it. So my buddy and I, we said, yep, absolutely, that was our fault. We get it. All hell broke loose, but at least we had done all of our backups and we were able to restore all of the data easily. But we didn't have only one SAN. We had a whole bunch of these SANs. So we said to the vendor, why don't you bring somebody on site the second time? Why don't you come on over here and you'll show us how it's done? Now, of course, I can't say it in that tone of voice. I have to say it with things like, I'm a complete idiot. I clearly don't know what I'm doing. I must have screwed up something in that implementation checklist, or there must be something that I didn't see that all of the other SAN administrators see. I know it's got to be my problem because you as a SAN vendor, you're a huge SAN vendor. You have all these customers who are very happy. Clearly, I'm the problem here. So I would really appreciate it if you could send someone in. I'll pay, we'll put it, whether it's with our service agreement or whatever, we'll pay to fly somebody out here to do it the second time. And then you go ahead and take care of it. Now, you audience are very smart. You can figure out what happened next. Of course, they did the firmware upgrade and the same thing happened. We lost the whole SAN. The beauty of this, as a database administrator, you're faced with upgrade problems all the time, schema problems all the time, vendors telling you what to do, people telling you what's going to fix a problem when you know darn well it's not going to fix the problem. Shrinking the database isn't going to make it any faster. But sometimes you get to the point where you just have to let go and you just have to say, okay, maybe the problem really is me. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, even though I know I do. But as long as I can get it in writing, or I can get you in front of my boss to see that you're going to be the one doing this, and would you mind driving? Suddenly, it'll make you look much better to your company when your trusted vendors or partners all of a sudden they pull their own pants down in public, and now you're able to see I told you so. I told you that wasn't going to work, and you need to trust me the next time that something like this happens. Or if it does work, you need to listen, be humble the whole time, pay attention, take notes, because this is how you learn. These people get to this point by experience. Sometimes when I'm working with a client under pressure, I'll say, look, I know you should never put the flux capacitor in backwards. It's a really bad idea, and we should never drive the DeLorean 88 miles an hour in reverse, but this is a really wacko thing, and I don't have time to explain it. Of course, the tricky part is how do you find those people that you can trust? Because even with, I look at like my Microsoft Certified Master certification, that doesn't mean everything. That doesn't mean I make the right judgment call all the time. I really think I learn more than I know every single week. So it's not just about pinning the blame. Sometimes it's about learning as well. Now, just because I'm right every now and then doesn't mean I can let it go to my head. This is a sign that's in one of my relatives' bathrooms, and I just took a picture of it because I couldn't get enough of it. I'm not bossy, I just have better ideas. You don't want to let it go to your head. You can't let yourself become one of those people. One of the guys who says, I know I'm right. You have to believe me. I've read everything. I've seen the source code. And there's examples of that in terms of people who are second guessing you constantly, managers who read magazines, look at buzzwords and say, let's just move it to the cloud. That'll fix everything. We don't need database administrators. There's people like this all the time. Developers as well will sometimes come to you and say, trust me, I need this index on here. This is the only way this will possibly work. Or, I don't understand why SQL Server can't parse this query fast enough. Clearly, I've written a beautiful query. Everything's in line exactly the way it should be. It should be performing. And sometimes you'll have to give them a contrarian answer. You're going to have to tell them things that go against what they say. Disagreements are tough. Disagreements are really tough for consultants. And sometimes I just have to sit back and use another line. Man, this is one where it kills me that the things aren't lined up right. Told you I wasn't going to talk about it, but there it is. The line is, sounds like you've got it all under control. And this is really best delivered when you've got a group full of people, say 5, 6, 7 people that are all angry and frustrated why the database isn't working the way they said, and they're looking at articles and they've done everything exactly the way the article says on the web, and they say, this has to be the answer, and you come in and say, well, actually, no, you shouldn't be using RAID 0 on TempDB. And they'll say, no, it has to be this way. This is what everyone recommends. And then you can say, okay, it sounds like you've got it all under control. And then shut up. Keep your mouth shut and listen. This is where it comes into playing a little game of chicken. You have to literally just say nothing. Sit there and then let them think through it for a second. Because what they're really doing is they're saying, wait, I think I have all the answers, but the system isn't working the way I want it to. Maybe I don't have all the answers. Now, maybe the jerk in the room isn't going to be the one who speaks up, because this often happens when you've got the one power user, the one developer, the one guy who's really deep into the trenches, and he believes truly and deeply that he's got the right answer, but everybody else on the team has started to notice that he's wrong, that things aren't working the way he said they were going to work. And now, as long as you're quiet, someone else on the team, usually a manager, a project manager, a team lead will say, well, why don't we give this other thing a shot just to see? Why don't we let this DBA or this outsider come in and just take a second look? Because clearly we've tried it repeatedly in-house, and it's just not working the way that we would have expected it to work. The key to delivering this line is knowing to shut up. And once you shut up for a while, if nobody speaks up, you got to pack your bags and leave, because they don't want your help. Man, this is a tough lesson to learn. It's conveyed best by one of my favorite books of all time, The Secret of Consulting by Gerald Weinberg. And he talks about being a consultant is really all about giving advice. Some people don't want advice. They want to play pin the blame on the donkey, basically, and you're going to be the donkey at that conference room table. Being a database administrator, same thing. It's about giving advice. We have to give advice to the SAN guy. We have to give advice to the developers, to the sysadmins, to the virtualization administrators, all those guys. We have to give them advice, but if they're not going to take it, walk away, because there's nothing you can do to convince them if they're not even interested in hearing your approach. What they really want you to say is, you're right. It must be a database problem. It must be a hardware problem, whatever. I've had clients say, man, that's ridiculous. I can write a better database than that. SQL Server sucks. You must be right. And it's tough delivering that line and not coming off as a sarcastic joke. And it's, you can kind of coach your way into it after a while to say, yeah, I hear you. There's a lot of compromises that we have to make when dealing with a closed source database like Microsoft SQL Server. And your attitude is exactly what drove a lot of people to build things like MySQL, open source databases where they can write features in that they want. And sometimes those features are much better than what we get in SQL Server. It might be time for you to investigate looking at one of those solutions so that, two, if you find out that you need a particular piece of logic that's not there, you can either code it in or you can contract someone else to code it in for you. Now, by delivering a line like that, if you can pull it off with the right poker face, the project managers in the room will go, what, are you stupid? No way are we going to switch database platforms. No, stop and listen to what this outsider is telling you. We are already invested in SQL Server or whatever the technology is that you're working with. Shut up, stop complaining about whether or not the database sucks, and start learning to work within the rules. Because every system sucks. All of them. Every single software system, hardware system, networking system, SAN. I tell you what, there's a brilliant line on a bathroom wall that I read once. Not that I read all the lines in the bathroom walls, but some of them turn into be consulting lines. Not this particular one, but on a bathroom wall it said, no, and it was a men's bathroom wall, so it's a little sexist, I have to preface this. It says, no matter how good she looks, somebody somewhere is already sick of her, meaning, no matter how good the technological system is, now that's not what they meant, but that's what I mean, no matter how good the system appears to be from the outside, it's got weaknesses, and we have to learn to work around those weaknesses. If someone isn't willing to work around those weaknesses, you have to step away. Now, you can't be a jerk about this when you do it, because sometimes they really are reading advice out there on the internet from what looks like reputable sources. I'm going to use a couple of examples here. SQLServerPerformance.com used to be an amazing piece of information. I relied on this every day as my job as a database administrator. I love the stuff Brad McGehee wrote. This particular article is by Brad McGehee, who is a SQL Server genius. He's extremely good with SQL Server. But notice the date on it, August 2nd, or August 22nd, 2005. Any piece of information, as it gets old and rots, can become inaccurate over time. Now, unfortunately, fortunately for Brad, he sold this company, but the subsequent owner of this company has not put any work into updating the articles. So let's read some of the lines off of here. One of the best ways to monitor your server's I/O subsystem is to use the physical disk object average disk queue length to monitor. No, it's not. That was a very good piece of advice when it was written at the time. But in the year 2011, when we're dealing with shared storage environments, when you can't predict the number of drives in an array or how many other servers you're sharing it with, this advice is garbage. And even though this article goes on and explains several other perfmon counters that are also now garbage, Brad knows they're not right anymore, but he can't change this anymore because this is now owned by a different company. Well, this site was reliable for forever, so people who don't spend time keeping up with blogs will think that this is the gospel truth, and they'll bring this in and wave it to you saying, I'm monitoring this perfmon counter, and it says I've got horrible disk queue lengths. Meanwhile, my latency, which is a good number, suddenly doesn't have any holdups at all. Well, I have to argue this with the person, too. Now, that's not the only bad website out there. It's not just independent websites that suffer from this. Excuse me. This is TechNet here. So this is a Microsoft site, but again, written years ago, November 30th, 2006. Now I'm going to pull out my trusty highlighter here and check out this section right here. Memory, available megabytes. A consistent value of less than 20 to 25% of installed RAM is an indication of sufficient memory. Bullshit. That is simply not true. If we've correctly set our max server memory, a SQL Server's max server memory by default is fairly unlimited. It'll go up to, I want to say, 2 terabytes if I remember correctly, or 2 petabytes it might be. I got to look. But it's in either way. None of us have this much memory in our servers. The SQL Server will go through and use as much memory as it can possibly get. But that doesn't mean you necessarily don't have enough memory, especially if we've been good about configuring max server memory to leave enough room for the OS to breathe. There are other counters that we have to look at as well, things like grants pending, page life expectancy, so that we can look outside the buffer pool and see other things that are going on as well. This one is garbage. If you just went by this one metric alone, you could continuously, Joris caught my Top Gun reference. I usually use the one, your body's writing checks, your ego's writing checks, your body can't cash. If you just went by this, you could write a new check for memory every single month, continuously buying more memory and stuffing it in the server, not understanding that as SQL Server grows, it'll continue to cache more and more, right up until you're caching the entire database. The way that you have to recover from this, Robert Davis, fellow Microsoft SQL or Microsoft Certified Master, who's actually better at SQL Server than I am, wrote, I am correct, 2 terabytes for max memory. As my father used to say, or still says, he's still alive, bless his heart, knock on wood, I hope he hasn't died recently. God, that's an awful thing to say. He used to say, or still says, see, there I go again. He still says, even a blind squirrel can get a nut sometimes. So that was me getting a blind squirrel. Rich, I'm going to come back to you on that question. I'm going to catch that one at the end. So the way that I deal with questions like this, when somebody comes in waving these pieces of paper that are just ridiculously outmoded and flat out incorrect, even though they're from reputable sources like TechNet or SQL Server Performance, you have to use another consulting line. And this line is, yes, that used to be a best practice, and every part of this, every single part of this is very important. Yes, meaning I'm not disagreeing. You have to take what they're saying and set it aside. Yes. I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say yes. It's like those, the karate guys who they use their opponent's force against them. Someone comes rushing at you. You can take that energy and turn it into their own problem by saying yes. Well, how? We can just set this aside and say that used to be a best practice. Even though you're not necessarily telling the truth, that article might have been, because sadly, those 2 articles, I'm not going to talk about those, but other articles out there are not best practices from the day they were written. They were garbage from the day they were written, especially most of the stuff you find on my site, unless it was written by one of my coworkers, in which case it's good. But yes, that was a best practice. We're going to set that aside, use that motion and just deflate it. And we've since learned that there's another problem. And we found even better perfmon counters to look at, or we found other ways to configure TempDB. So by saying this initial prefix, you just simply set them aside, and just keep right on moving. We have to explain, too, to them, it's really good that you found that we are validating your knowledge. You are not stupid, even though they might be, as part of being a consultant and a database administrator. You have to stop saying, I'm right, the client's wrong. Everybody is right. They're doing the best job that they can with the tools that they have and the time that they have. That's not a slam against anybody's intelligence. It's just the people with real jobs, you guys, database administrators, I remember so clearly what that was like. The only way I could read blogs was to do it on the weekend and at night. We can't all do that. We don't have the time to sit on our rears and go through and find all the good stuff off of Google Reader. So by giving this line, you're saying, yes, your knowledge is good, but now we found an even better solution. I'll be glad to say we'll explain it to you. We'll take as long as we want. But we're not going to fight over the accuracy of that other post that you brought up or that other best practice. This lets everybody leave with dignity, because so often in our engagements, whether they're consulting engagements or whether we're just a DBA, the developer is there trying to get something that he wants, and he believes he's found something valid, and he's standing right next to his manager. The developer doesn't want to look stupid in front of the manager, and the manager doesn't want to look stupid for hiring a stupid developer. The reality is that we have to make everybody involved look good. We have to tell the developer, yes, you're right, you found a good article on the web. We have to tell the manager, yes, you're right, you hired good people, and Mr. Manager, you're right for bringing me involved so that I can help get you even to the next level. I'll give you more stuff that you can show off to your friends and make your servers perform even better. I know that it's hard to stay on top of all those things, but I'm your guy. You're one who's going to lead you to all those cool things, is what you're going to say as a DBA or as a consultant. So speaking of which, we'll wrap this up by pointing to the resources. I know it is hard as all get out in order to stay on touch with all kinds of things. That's why, as a consultant, I have plenty of time to sit around and read blogs. And then I blog about blogs. And then we also have a newsletter where we recap the best 10 or 11, 12 links of the entire week out of everything that we read. Me, Jeremiah, Kendra, and Tim, the four of us read more blogs than, man, let me just tell you, now that three of us are consultants, we have lots of time to read blogs. So we go through and capture all the best, coolest stuff, the neatest tricks out of our Swiss Army knives, and document them all on the site. So you can sign up for our newsletter there at the top of the page by clicking community, or read about the full detail behind all of the consulting lines that you've seen today at brentozar.com/go/lines. Now, Rich, I believe, is from, I don't know if that's Rich from Miami or not, says, manager wants to force the database in, Rich, man, you write a lot of stuff. He says, one manager wants to force another DBA to use hardware as a SQL backup target and force it politically. I have the perfect article for you, and I've got lines to back it up. Go to my site, go to brentozar.com, and search for dedupe, D-E-D-U-P-E. And I've got a whole article on there explaining why you do not want to use dedupe for SQL Server backups. It can be okay. There are situations where dedupe actually makes sense for SQL Server backups. But if you're in a case where it doesn't make sense, I explained to you how to explain it to managers and how to prove it technically to the dedupe guys why you do not want to be doing your backups over there to that. You can literally print that out and say, here, go through line by line and debate these topics. So that wraps up everything I've got here for today. If you run into challenges with your own boss or with your managers or fellow employees where you need a consulting line, just like Rich did, feel free to shoot me an email. And odds are I've either written about it or one of the guys, folks we're involved with, has either written about it or we've got advice on how to get around it as well. Mastering this concept, understanding how to use lines to your own defense, is what will get you to be a manager instead of a database administrator, to be able to be the DBA team lead and enable to work better with developers, other managers, and your consultants.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate you coming out today and talking with everybody. And fantastic information here. And again, as Brent mentioned, you can get more on Brent's website, brentozar.com, or follow Brent on Twitter as @BrentO. And if you want to get more from the Professional Development Virtual Chapter, we have a blog on the prof-dev.sqlpath.org website. You can follow the Twitter hashtag. And again, reminder, the recording of this will be available within 24 hours. I'll get that posted and send out information through Twitter and on the blog about accessing that recording for folks who weren't able to see the whole thing or want to go through it again. A lot of fantastic information. Thanks again, Brent.
Thanks, my pleasure.